I've changed my makeup. Did you notice?
Hello and welcome to Something Rotten's season finale on our Killer7 / No More Heroes season. Suda 51, Blake and I are both now experts in the field of Suda 51, and we're here to answer all your questions on it. Blake.
Jacob.
What up?
Let's talk. Podcast guy to podcast guy.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the numbers right now. Spotify gives podcasters a very interesting map of everywhere your show has been listened to. And Jacob, this is not a huge show by any means, but compared to other podcasts I've done, it is definitely a global show.
That's right. We're a phenomenon.
We're not, but we're listened to all across the world by a very small amount of people. I would say, interestingly, I haven't run the raw numbers, but just looking at the map, I would say at least half of all the countries on Earth, at least one person has listened to Something Rotten, which is really crazy to think about.
Wow.
I can just screenshot this map for you.
There was something that I feel like Hansen did maybe on MinMax and maybe even way back on the Game Informer show where you could get like a list of all the devices that had listened to your thing, and some of them were like a Nintendo DS, or like a Zoom.
I like all the countries where we've only had like one listen. Like only one person in Mongolia has ever listened to us, only one time.
Hey, and shout out to that person.
So I bring all this up to say, now, for the listener, the chronology is going to be a little out of whack here, because if you listen to...
We're kind of time traveling.
...the third episode of next season, you'll hear I brought up the fact that Jacob has not followed me on Blue Sky. Now, this is kind of like watching A New Hope before episode 1, right? Jacob, I want you in front of the world to know their actions to your consequences. Or their consequences
their actions
to your actions.
To my consequences.
Their consequences to your actions. Now, I see you grabbing your phone.
I'm getting ready to block you on Blue Sky.
Well, that's what I want you to know. There are consequences to you not following your dearest friend Blake. I'm blocking you on Blue Sky for not following me back. Post hidden.
Where will I get pictures of Reagan from now?
That's the thing. That's the only place I'm posting them these days. So
that's fucked up.
Jacob Geller gets 1 million subscribers, doesn't think he needs to follow Blake Hester anymore. That's all I'm saying, folks. In front of the world, literally half the countries in the world, I've blocked you on Blue Sky.
A week and a half ago, I would go on Blue Sky and I was like, hey, this place is like kind of moving now. Yeah. And now I go on there and there are like 3 people who post a lot. And it's just kind of like, oh, I guess I'm going to read their thoughts.
Here's the thing about Blue Sky, why I feel fine blocking you. Because no one's posting anything important there and I don't check it. So I'm not going to miss anything from you. But I'm going to stick to my laurels. I'll never unblock you on it. Second, my take on Blue Sky is there's too many fucking posts about Twitter on Blue Sky. It's like, that's like the whole thing. You go on there to complain about a different app.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're going to start a new friend group. And then you go and all you do is talk shit about the other friend group. And it's like, I guess we need more than this to make something meaningful.
Yeah. Anyway, you want to answer some questions? No. I've caused a dramatic rift between the podcast hosts here.
I will say a couple times I've wanted to tweet something that I just didn't want to read any responses to. Mm-hmm. And so then I have gone on Blue Sky and just tweeted that.
Here's the thing. In the pre-block era, you had a really good Mr. Beast Blue Sky post. It was really funny. I liked it.
But you'll never see another one.
Nope, I won't.
Okay. Blake, let's jump into some questions.
Hold on.
This first one. Oh.
I'm sorry. In my band's group chat, right as he said that, I got a text that said, congrats. And in the text before, it was like, hey, I don't know if I can FaceTime tonight. One of my best friends is getting married, so I'm pretty busy. And then one of the dudes just said, congrats. And I'm like, does he think I'm getting married? Like, I don't think I deserve any congratulations.
I like the idea of just congratulating a random friend who is getting married.
Yeah, it's just like, he doesn't even know the dude getting married. So anyway.
Hey, good for him.
Let's get into it.
Okay. So the first question, we're going to combine two from Mervin and from David Sharp because they are essentially the same question, which is, hey, remember when we thought we were going to play Flower, Sun, and Rain instead of No More Heroes?
Yeah.
Why did we decide to do that? Why pick Flower, Sun, and Rain over any of Suda's other games?
As I recall, you brought up Flower, Sun, and Rain, and I'd never heard of it. And I watched a 2-minute long Waypoint video from nearly 10 years ago where Austin Walker said, this game, I'm paraphrasing a bit, seems to hate the player. And I said, good enough for me. And
he said it seemed punk. It was.
I kind of disregarded that part because I just am a little over the punk moniker on anything at all, including punk music itself. But his conversations around how antagonistic the game seemed to be against the player interested me. But I think that was why we ultimately chose not to play it.
Because he didn't include the antagonism of a Nintendo DS emulator on your computer screen. It was a test of, like, there are obviously a lot of Suda games, and it was like he has a lot that kind of seem too dumb, or did to me previous to this season. I looked at, like, Shadows of the Damned, and I was like, that game where the guy's gun is like his dick, and he like shoots it like he's shooting his dick. No, thank you. Yeah. Not for me. Now, having played No More Heroes and seeing, like, how intelligently a dumb tone can be set, maybe I'd enjoy it. Yeah. But I do think it was, and then I kind of didn't want to do No More Heroes just because it seemed, I like the idea of doing a less obvious one, maybe, but I hadn't played No More Heroes, and now having played it, I'm so glad that we did.
Yeah. No thoughts, head empty. I still kind of want to play Flower, Sun, and Rain, but also, like, the barrier to entry with that game right now, it's really keeping me away from it. But I am curious, like, Grasshopper has been remastering or remaking some of Suda's old games, so I wonder if Flower, Sun, and Rain is, like, on that list somewhere. Don't know.
Yeah. Mervin says that that the Silver Case trilogy is, like, complex but very good. I do think the challenge with doing a visual novel in general is, like, it's like almost the only thing you can talk about is the story, and I'm just kind of I have trouble following this is, like, an embarrassing thing to admit, but I feel like sometimes I just have trouble following stories where, like,
sure,
I get characters mixed up, I kind of can't remember who's doing what or whatever, and so the concept of almost exclusively just talking about the story absent from, like, gameplay or whatever for several podcast episodes is kind of intimidating to me because I just feel like I would be, like, reveal myself as dumb,
Now, that said, on the short list of games I'm really dying to play right now, it's basically just the Silver Case, the 25th Ward, and Silent Hill 4, actually. Just watched a video about Silent Hill 4, and I was like, I fuck with this.
Was it Eurofolks video?
No, it was a YouTuber, Carlin, their video, The Vibes of Silent Hill 4. I didn't really know anything.
How do you spell that?
Cullen. I didn't really know anything about the game, and I watched it, and I was like, holy shit, this is cool. It looks annoying to play. But yeah. So, that said, 25th Ward and Silver Case are, like, the games I'm dying to play right now. I was looking at the special edition for them recently, and I don't, like, buy physical games, much less special editions of games, but I was like, I think I'm gonna pick this up just to have it. So if we don't do it for Something Rotten, I'm gonna just play it soon, but we'll figure it out. It's on our list.
I support you.
Thank you.
Okay, Gretchen writes in with a truly great email that I'm going to read in its entirety. Gretchen says, I got both No More Heroes 1 and 2 at a GameStop for $10 each when I was 13, solely because I had heard of the game a couple times on some old top video game bosses ranking lists on YouTube back in the day. Relatable, and wanted to check them out.
What bosses do you think were there from No More Heroes 1?
It's like the best bosses of the game.
It's the singing guy, right?
I guess. I mean, I could imagine them going in like a couple different directions. You know, it's like if it's just kind of craziest bosses, then it could be like Bad Girl or who's the final boss?
Gene.
Gene. You know, Gene would be like, oh, hardest bosses or something, maybe.
But the best is, of course, the old lady.
Well, the best is the giant brain that gets sliced in half and you don't fight it.
Yeah, that's the best. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. Gretchen continues. They were two of my first M-rated games, and to say a budding, edgy teen me was positively gobsmacked by its hyperviolence would be an understatement. Since my media literacy hadn't fully developed proper yet, I could kind of get what the game's messages were putting down, but was far from my biggest takeaway. Their biggest takeaway was, Travis Touchdown looks so cool, I really want to dress like him. For like the entire next year of my life, I tried my very hardest to mimic Travis's getup in any way a kid from rural New England with no money could. I'm talking jacket, belts, worn jeans, sunglasses, everything save the pompadour. I think I even asked my parents a few times if I could get a cosplay replica of the jacket on eBay for thousands of dollars, which they reasonably turned down every time. Over time, various conditions forced me to adapt from going full touchdown. Sunglasses and excessive belts weren't allowed during school hours, and warmer weather forced me to downgrade from leather jackets to flannels and basic overshirts.
Right.
I would even still sometimes pop the collar like Travis's jacket with the shirts, which only made me look even more like a gigador.
Gigadork is so good.
By the end, my look was super basic and completely unassuming. Overshirt, t-shirt, jeans, sneakers. It was the same basic outfit I wore for several years later, at least until I took more interest in expanding my wardrobe. Many who knew me just took it as my look, but only I knew that the very impetus of such a casual look was none other than Mr. Touchdown himself.
Incredible.
So, their question is, has a video game ever impacted your wardrobe or attitude in any way? If not, what's one piece of clothing from a video game you've always wanted?
No, it hasn't for me. But the one thing I probably would wear is, of course, 9S's outfit from Nier Automata. I'd dress up like a little schoolboy with the... No, it'd be fucking Leon's jacket from Resident Evil 4. Like, that's the only one. That jacket's so sick.
Well, so here's the thing about me. I do have Leon's jacket. I bought it. It's not a replica, but I was like, I studied abroad in Scotland when I was in college, and I, as a boy from North Carolina, did not have jackets that were warm enough for that cold ass place.
Right.
And so I went to like a flea market in London at one point, and I saw that jacket, and I thought, that looks warm, and I also thought, that looks like Leon S. Kennedy's jacket from Resident Evil 4. So I did buy it because of that. And then my other one, the most expensive piece of clothing I own, is I have the Kim Kitsuragi jacket from Disco Elysium, which is cool as hell. I would love, honestly, the... Look, friend of the show, Renata Price, has both the Kim jacket and the Kim pants, and she looks way cooler than I ever have wearing both of them. And it's like, that look is so good, but I feel like I'm almost just not a cool enough looking person to pull it off. Like, I just kind of look like a dork, and Ren looks cool as hell.
I have a remarkably small amount of even just like video game shirts, but
you have a remarkably large amount of movie shirts.
Yeah, because they're sick. Also, my best friend runs a bootleg clothing line, so I just kind of end up with a bunch of them. But I have like one of the PlayStation anniversary hoodies I bought that honestly I think is still pretty sick. But one of the ones I'd have that's so rad and I've never worn it is a hat that my dear friend Matt Leone sent me. I don't remember why he sent me, and I have no clue how he found this, but it was a promotional hat for, the publisher Acclaim, long out of business, published like Turok, shit like this.
Okay, sure.
Their old baseball game, which I cannot remember the name of. Acclaim baseball game. All-Star Baseball. Yeah. The 2000 release of that. It's like a promotional baseball cap for All-Star Baseball 2000 in impeccable shape. Like, looks like it's never been worn. It's probably the only piece of video game merch I have that I think is super sick, but I've never worn it. So there you go. Shouts out to Matt Leon, friend of the show. I don't know if he listens to this.
Who do you think who's like the best dressed video game character? And why is it Dante from Devil May Cry 3, where he's just wearing that red jacket with no shirt?
It's not. Come on now. Best dressed.
I mean, Bayonetta, maybe.
I'm trying to think of actually like someone.
Yeah,
if
it's
I
like
saw
who
them
looks like
outside.
a normal clothes. It still looks ridiculous, but Lightning from Final Fantasy 13, I always thought was like one of the coolest Final Fantasy looking characters without being, like you could see. Though I think there actually were like actual fashion line tie-ins with FF13, and it was like, yeah, you could see that on a high-end thing.
She was like famously a Louis Vuitton model. Like that was like the thing they did. Yeah. I think video games are by and large dripless. So it's hard for me to think of one.
What, you're not jumping for Sora?
Like something I thought was pretty remarkable, all things considered, was that the protagonist, granted it's a first-person game, of Ghostwire Tokyo, dressed like a normal, fairly fashionable person in their 20s. Like he didn't have any flares to him. There was no clothes that clearly no one would ever wear. He just looked like a normal dude in his 20s that like that's how they would dress, like kind of a like hip, fashionable dude. And I was like, wow, they actually put the time into like figuring out how human beings dress. I can't remember the name of that character, but for some reason, that's the only one that stands out to me recently. So shouts out to Ghostwire Tokyo, an awesome game. Love that shit. Friends of the show, Tango Gameworks. All right, am I getting the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
You know what our sponsor, Henson Razors, is really good for?
Yeah, making you have less hair on your body, doofus.
Okay, but also gifts. Father's Day just passed, but this is a super classy and kind of cool thing to give for a birthday or something. My friend's son recently graduated high school, and this is a true story. He got him a Henson razor as like a "you're a man now" present. Son, here's your razor.
Jacob, you're like 26. How do you have a friend that just got a son that graduated high school?
Because I have mature friends, Blake.
Well, regardless, I hope your friend remembered to go to hensonshaving.com, use the promo code ROTTEN, so he could also give his son a free box of blades.
Happy graduation, son. Here's 100 razor blades.
Jacob, do you think we host a good podcast?
Yeah, I think so. Do you?
Hell no. Have you heard this thing? It's full of ads where we act like buffoons.
Okay, a little rude. I write most of the ads.
That's why I subscribe to the Something Rotten podcast on Nebula, where I get early, bonus, and most importantly, ad-free episodes delivered straight to my podcast app of choice.
Do you not like my ads? We get people telling us they like our ads.
A few months ago, I went to nebula.tv/somethingrotten. I paid a small monthly fee, and now I have access to this show. Jacob, I also have access to all your secret videos, like where you cook with your partner. Those are very good.
That's true.
And thousands of hours of other great podcasts and videos from creators I love, like Leo Vader. You ever heard of this guy? Funny as the day is long. It has made my life way better, too, not having to hear those goofy-ass ads anymore.
Blake, I poured my heart into those ads, and you wrote this and are just freaking slandering me all over the place.
Should tried harder, bucko. That's nebula.tv/somethingrotten. Get early, ad-free, and bonus episodes of this show and more when you sign up at the link. Let's see here. This comes in from Neuroflare, who just says, Jacob's a coward. Cat was a great guest. Now, Jacob, you might not remember. You, on the bonus episode for DMC, you refused to do an Australian accent.
Oh, that's right. And I was like, wait, why am I a coward?
And I said, listeners, write in and say Jacob's a coward. But Cat was a great guest. Nebula.tv/somethingrotten. You can listen. Cat was awesome. Shouts out to her. Okay, so this one comes in from Roar. I do not have a question, but I do want to tell you about the saga of Harald the Hairy, the first king of Norway. Harald the Hairy. It's kind of hard to say, because it shares some similarities with the plot of No More Heroes. So, according to Snorre Sturlason, Harald was really into this girl named Gyda. Gyda? Man, really picked a hard one here. So he sent some messengers to propose marriage to her. She says that she would only accept his offer if he was king of Norway. At that point, Norway is a collection of towns ruled by Jarls, and Harold was just one of these. His messenger basically told Geida, Harold is not going to like this, but she sends them on their way. When they reached Harold, he says, sure, send the messages back to Geida, and I'm just going to pronounce it both ways and assume one is right, and goes to conquer most of Norway. Pussy make a man act crazy, I tell you what. Are we allowed to keep that in? I don't know.
No, we gotta.
Okay. At some point, he decides that marrying Geida is not enough motivation to continue his conquest, so he just decides that he is not going to cut his hair until he is the one king of Norway, thus earning him the name Harold the Hairy. P.S. I bought and played Killer 7 so I could play it alongside your pod and found it excellent. That's a great story. Shouts out to
That is so
Harold.
funny. I love the idea of, like, no one's telling him that he has to cut his hair, but he's just like, well, I'm not going to cut my hair until I conquer Norway.
Yeah. I love that dudes have never changed either. Like 800
That's right.
years ago, this dude, he could be in 2023 and he's like, well, I'm not going to cut my hair until I beat all of Dark Souls 3 without dying. It's effectively the same thing, you know?
Bro, no, I'm not going to shower until I beat Elden Ring.
Yeah. Well, look, listen. I'm going to platinum NBA 2K23, and until then, I'm only going to eat Hershey's mint chocolate chip kisses. That's dudes rock. I'll read the next one, too.
Blake, why'd you just do my voice like that?
I don't know. Do you play the NBA 2K games?
No.
They're so good. I love the 2K games. We should squad up. I felt that
Something rotten. Whoa, what about, what's the most rotten sport? Because I think it's football.
It's football.
Or boxing. One of the ones that gives people brain injuries by playing.
Oh my god, not too long ago, I watched FD Signifier's Mike Tyson video. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh my god, a wild journey. I wonder if the Spike Lee joint, NBA 2K, whatever year that was, think there's any rot to that?
Wait, what? I don't know about this.
Spike Lee directed the campaign of one of the NBA 2K games.
Is it? Okay, 2K16. The first one is, the first result is an article from The Verge called Spike Lee Ruined My Favorite NBA 2K16 Game Mode. Here's the second one. This is a real classy headline. How Spike Lee didn't do the right thing with NBA 2K16.
No, that's good. That's good. Maybe we should play that. I think that would be an interesting season.
First, I would need to learn how to play basketball.
Anyway, I'm going to add that one to the list. So this comes in from Hunter. I feel that in Suda's games, perhaps more than any other game you've discussed on the pod so far, human life has little to no value. Killer 7 is the best example because the majority of enemies you kill are the smiles, which no longer resemble humans, but in his future titles, especially No More Heroes 1 and 2, all but a handful of characters only exist only to be killed or die in spectacular fashion. Additionally, Killer 7 gives you almost no one to care about or protect, which gives me the impression that you shoot hundreds of smiles and the two anime girls with no motivation beyond either this is what I've been hired to do or Harmon really hates Kunlan. Manhunt comes to mind, but I wanted to ask directly. Do you feel like how life is valued is a contributing factor to a game's rottenness? If so, what rotten game do you think values human life the least? You're fucked. Hunter. I'm not saying Hunter's fucked. That was his sign up. I think there's like something inherently uneasy about the lack of humanity in rotten games, you know? Like when kind of the whole point is, especially Manhunt. Like we talked early, like maybe the first episode of Manhunt, we talked about that first kill where it's like,
yeah,
we're led to believe that that was staged. That person died just so like Cash in game and in the world could be comfortable with killing, right? Like that person was just a pawn. And I remember that being like very unsettling. That said, next season, which we're not divulging, I think like puts a lot of work into humanizing even the most basic NPC enemy characters in ways that I think are equally troubling. So I don't think it's like kind of one or the other. I think there are ways that both can be equally as like disconcerting to me.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. Something that it makes me think of is like you kind of have to call attention to the lack of value that human life has, because if you don't call attention to it, it is just a video game.
Yeah.
You know, like not to use the obvious example, but it's like you kill less people in Manhunt than you do in Uncharted.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like, when you think about Uncharted, you're not like, this is a game where human life doesn't matter, because it's so sidelined that you don't even think about the fact that you are like killing people. And so I think Killer7 and No More Heroes do walk this interesting line where they make you think about how meaningless it is, and because of that you notice the uncomfortability that you were referencing. And I think that's really cool. I think that's why, like, even in the, you know, the kind of stupid side activities in No More Heroes, that kind of hyper gore and the weird screams of the characters and whatever, like, they lend it a little something, because it's just like too weird to be fully discounted.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to get the next one?
Yes. This is from Psych Kale. Hello, Blake and Jacob.
Hello.
Longtime listener, first time caller.
Don't call me. How'd you get my number?
At any rate, something that's interested me as the series has progressed and you've approached more and more series is how you all return to the question of not necessarily ethical boundaries, but like the merit of certain kinds of artistic depictions and the smeary, blurry line between reproduction and criticism in art. Speaking as a big-time Suda fan who got into No More Heroes at an age altogether inappropriate in the Wii era, who has come back to a lot of work she used to like with a new critical eye and a whole new gender, I want to ask something. 1. How do you draw the line on whether something, even if it is artistic, is distasteful enough to not justify its presence? And 2, in the vein of something like Suda or Kojima, do you think that the line moves if the person spearheading the work in question has a reputation of being someone artsy or avant? For example, Suda and his weird pitfalls with race and women that he still kind of hasn't worked out, or Kojima and his big woman issue that he still hasn't figured out to this day as of Death Stranding.
I always think, when I think about something like this, I always think back to, as I do for many things in life, a Leo Vader quote. Who one time on Game Query, the official podcast record, said, paraphrasing a bit, "Yeah, I'm sure Birth of a Nation is a great movie and did a lot for the film industry, but we would have figured it out if that movie hadn't come out." And I always think about that in terms of like whether despicable art that like accomplishes something or is unmistakably great in its artistry is like truly worthwhile. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It's like, would someone else have figured out the accomplishments D.W. Griffith did in terms of movie making if his racist ass would have not been allowed to make that despicable film? Which, to be fair, I've not watched. I don't really give a shit how good it is because it's a film that glamorizes the Ku Klux Klan. Fuck him, and glad he's dead. But I often think about Leo's point there. I don't know that I super agree with it, but I like the thesis of it.
So, okay.
Yeah.
That is, I do feel like, you know, that is, it's an extreme example. I mean, to be clear, it's like, I agree with Leo or whatever. But I think this is, you know, we are talking about these games that we identify problematic elements in.
But I don't think the art is inherently problematic. And because it's like, if we're just playing games that are problematic across the board, like we said, we would have just done the Postal Hatred season and called it a day. Like, I think there's like value to these games in their messages.
Well, that's beyond. I think that's the question: is how do we decide? How do we decide that Postal and Hatred are without value? And these other games that we've covered that do have overt misogyny or racism or whatever are like worth it where those are not.
I think it's like general understanding of the creators, right? Like Hatred and Postal are made by like Gamergate chuds. And it's like, I don't really care about exploring their worldviews. And like Suda is like clearly not that. He maybe doesn't, I don't know that I necessarily, especially younger Suda, with some of the stuff in Killer7, I don't think I necessarily align with his, like, all his belief systems. But I also don't think he's, like, a despicable person. Like, I think he has good ideas worth exploring. But, like, any artist, especially one making games in the early 2000s, like, he's fumbling a lot along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I slightly disagree in that it's like, I think you can do this without knowing anything about the creator. Just because, like, I think the point of, the point of Birth of a Nation is to glorify the KKK. Like,
Yep.
there's, like, no other story in it. The point of Postal, you know, is to be, like, it is essentially, like, antisocial, you should, you know, go and kill game developers, or ironically, but, like, I don't think there's anything more behind that, you know. And I do think that, like, even though Kojima's games are, like, not great on women, they are not, their bedrock is not a hatred of women.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, that gets in because Kojima does a lot of things in every game. And similarly, you know, with Suda, it's like, we pointed out, and we will continue to point out, all of these kind of, like, problematic elements of games, but it's like, if the game was not built with that as its focus,
right,
you know, like, you walk away and you're not like, the thesis statement is terrible, then I think, you know, I don't like using product of its time to excuse things, but I do think that you can kind of understand, like, this is an artistic work attempting to do something interesting, and also the creator's inherent kind of, like, biases and prejudices have worked their way in there, but as long as that's not kind of like, they didn't make it because they hate women.
Yeah. I think that was a very smart and eloquent way to say what I said. I feel like we agree. We're on the same page here.
Yeah.
And it was always great to shut down D.W. Griffith. Fucking rest in piss, bozo.
Hey.
Are you going to read this next one?
Yeah, I will kind of consolidate it,
Okay.
but it is an interesting email. This is from Maya. And Maya writes that they had never heard of Killer7 until our podcast featured it, and was really interested that we brought up the aesthetics of the game and how Suda's background as a graphic designer tied into Killer7's striking aesthetics. We talked about this a lot, how, like, every aspect of Killer7 is designed interestingly. Maya says, it was really interesting that you brought up that aspect of Suda's career because it speaks to how different things are today in regards to the handling of player controls and general visibility in games, especially when it comes to aesthetics. Graphic designers are called on to make game logos, pick out fonts and color schemes, and make promotional material, but in terms of design and functionality, we have a new department for that now, user experience or interface, UX, UI. It's a whole other field to study and master at this point, and I know a lot of graphic design majors who will minor in UX or vice versa, because while there's overlap between the two fields, they are totally separate entities. Maya goes on to talk about how, you know, this kind of makes sense because for a long time, graphic design was just a catch-all that, you know, any aspect of art went into graphic design. But says user experience and interface is taught on a much more technical level than graphic design. It's a lot more pragmatic, more focused on polls and survey results. So basically they're saying, like, you know, with this shift from graphic designers to the more specialized field of UI and UX, we're maybe not getting as much of that kind of radical Killer7 artistry in it because things have been separated out, and the things that UI people have been trained in are less artistically radical and more kind of functional.
Yeah, I think the more I've thought about this, and Suriel said something on the episode when we were talking about this, where he's like, Suda understands that, like, menus aren't, like, just function. They also, like, everything is narrative. And I think, like, with this shift towards cleaner aesthetics, we're, one, losing a lot of, like, just interesting visual design, like, at its most basic. Like, you can just, like, think of, like, the way, like, corporate designs have changed to that, like, there's a bunch of videos about it now, like the Slack color scheme, or how Google, like, which I don't want to be too nostalgic for old, you know, ads and shit. But, like, you know, there's a reason a lot of Twitter accounts exist that just post the interiors of 90s McDonald's. You know what I'm saying? Because the shit was, like, visually interesting. And I think games are losing a lot of, like, visual impact by removing interesting design elements. I think there are ways menus, even if they are not inherently telling a story, can get across the vibe of a game or the overall tone of a game, the way you're supposed to feel while playing it. I think of like Persona 5 and the way those menus are very flashy and bright, and it kind of just tells you as the player, like, this is the headspace you should be in while playing this. And then you play like I don't know, the Yakuza series, and it's just like an endless menu of like words and like checklists and like organizational tools.
I mean, it's the thing that everyone makes fun of, where it's just like every game screen looks like Destiny now. Yeah, where you just have like a gear number and like green and red arrows, and like, here's how you compare these different stats. And it's like, yeah, they all look the same because that's how we've decided it's most efficient to communicate information.
And I think like if that menu is communicating anything artistically about those types of games, it's that you might want to feel clinically about them. Like they're kind of like a second job, you know, like Destiny. For as much as people play that game, I don't ever hear anyone talk very positively about having to play Destiny. It sounds like a job. And it's like, well, yeah, so the menus just look like, you know, the Microsoft suite, like at that point. Like, whereas Killer 7, you play that, and the whole time, like, from the moment you boot the game up to the end credits, it's like that team was trying to think of interesting ways to catch your eye and make you be engaged with its story, even if that story is nonsensical at a lot of times. I feel like I was more engaged on a second-to-second basis than I am in most big-budget games these days.
Yeah, you know, it's like, I think at least some of it can be kind of blamed on, like, just the increasing complexity of games. Like, you have to, menus, because every game now has a crafting system and an upgrade tree and whatever, like, menus just have to be so much more, they have to be so much more expansive, and like the more expansive they are, my guess is the harder it is to fit in graphical flourishes, because you want it to just be, you know, as kind of easily readable as possible. But I think about like the difference between the new God of War menus, and like, do you remember what the upgrade screens on the old God of War looked like? Where you were like pouring blood into your blades, which was so cool. And it's like, you're both in both games, you're just kind of upgrading things, but the old one kind of communicates this really interesting vibe in a way that the new one just doesn't, because the new one has to make sure that you can get to like your companion's gear loadout crystal upgrades efficiently. I mean, I think, you know, you can even think about like, we both loved the Resident Evil 4 remake, but it's like that menu, even though it is so similar to the original's menu, is less interesting looking. Like, there's less kind of detail on the screen, especially with like treasures or whatever.
They don't have Leon on the side anymore, which I always thought was a great touch.
Yeah, it's just, you know, and I think aesthetics are just kind of trend based, and I imagine that in 15 years there will be people nostalgic for what these games looked like as well. But playing Killer 7 is a kind of a reminder that it's like, there is so much possibility space that we are not using because we want like clean looking games.
I'd also, like, for listeners, like a more contemporary example is like, check out Neon White, which was like hugely influenced by Killer 7 and what they do with the menus, or just Google the soundtrack cover arts and look at how much text.
Those are so sick.
Yeah, how much text is on those things, and how like it is a mess, but it looks so fucking good. Crazy shit. Neon White, one of the best games to ever do it. Ready to move on?
All right. Yeah.
I got this one. Hi, Blake and Jacob. Love the show. Oh, this comes from Ian, by the way. You mentioned in this week's episode of Killer 7 that the game kind of has a weird relationship with nationalism and the existence of a Japanese national military. Well, I also don't know anything about the modern politics of this. The history of Japan's relationship with foreign imperialism and with Japanese imperialism itself is super interesting. Basically, Japan had been on the receiving end of a pretty brutal colonialism by the US and Britain. The Meiji leadership at the time wanted to get on equal footing with the US and Britain, so they wouldn't get pushed around anymore, and their solution was to basically become a brutal colonial power themselves. Recently, I believe, Like a Dragon Ishin kind of dealt with this time, though fumbled the bag by the end of it.
I would say it pointedly did not deal with.
Well, I meant it's set around this time and features some of the characters. Sorry, misspoke. But yeah, fumbles the bag in a spectacular way in the final 10 seconds of that game. Places like Taiwan, this going back to the question, places like Taiwan, Korea, and China were brutally subjugated, and the whole thing is also what led to the Sino-Japanese War, which transitioned into World War II. And everything that happened there. So basically you read on the game's attitude being, I agree that U.S. imperialism is bad, but what you're proposing is just Japanese imperialism. It's pretty close to how history actually went. As a bonus, the show is also super interesting to listen to when talking about World at War. Blake mentioned that it was incredibly uncomfortable to be gunning down hordes of Japanese soldiers compared to the German soldiers in terms of how they were depicted. Interestingly, the way each country is depicted actually has its roots in how the U.S. propagandized Japan as compared to Germany. And they had sent a few history podcasts over, and this is a quote from one of those. Americans kind of had this image of both the German opponent in the Second World War and the Japanese opponent as robots, but different kind of robots. The German robot was like the Vision in the Avengers, cold, robotic, mathematical, efficient, precise, and deadly because of it. There's a coldness and a logical nature in there. The Japanese is the other side of the robot spectrum. They're like foaming at the mouth crazy robots. They don't stop. Their little finger will go after you if you leave that alone. They're ready to die for their empire, for their emperor. They're a cartoon character that's extremely dangerous. So yeah, uncomfortable indeed. In a lot of ways, I still feel like that's the way we view Germany and Japan in World War II. I don't feel like that's changed over the years.
Oh yeah, no. Have you ever listened to Hardcore History, Blake?
No.
That's the podcast that this is from. Supernova in the East is one of the episodes of it. Honestly, you might be really in. Do you know anything about it?
I don't at all.
It's this guy Dan Carlin, who does like obsessively researched history podcasts, and they are like 5 hours long, and he releases like one every like 8 months or whatever, or he'll like do a series, but they're like unbelievably long. And I'm sure I am not like a history guy. I'm sure there are people who kind of have problems with how he presents it, but they seem on a basic level to be like really good and interesting pictures of how things happen. And he also he has a, you know, he's a good podcast talker. He's very entertaining to listen to. Anyway, the beginning of this email is interesting. I mean, I don't have a ton to add to it, but like I think, you know, having Japanese games grappling with their own history of colonialism and atrocities is something that maybe because I'm not as attuned to it, I feel like I don't see very often.
Yeah, I think in general there's a really, I mean, and to not single out Japan, this is like an America problem for sure. But like Japan definitely has a tendency to overwrite its atrocities. But like Japan did not, they weren't innocent in a lot of shit. You know, you can look up plenty of what they did. I think there's a huge tendency in just the way history is taught for leave out a lot of that in the same way America does. I'm not going to fucking act like I don't live in a country that does that. And I've had to spend my adult life relearning history. But I think you see that in some of these games for sure, especially Like a Dragon Ishin. The ending of that game's a wild trip.
Remember in that game when they're on their way to deliver their proposed constitution to the emperor,
like,
and
hey,
then Kiryu's like, they're like, you know what we should include? We should include a clause that says all people are equal.
Yeah. And then remember at the end of the game, he looks directly in the camera for a call to Japanese nationalism.
He's like, hey, Japan might screw up, but it won't be a big deal because we'll always be a great country.
Now, here's the thing. I disagree, Kiryu. What was his name? It wasn't Kiryu.
Well, he had like 3 names.
Oh, right, yeah. And now, the game coming out in a few months, he's erased his name.
Yeah, that's right.
Deep cut.
Sakamoto Ryoma.
Right,
of course.
Right. What a game.
I mean, I do like that game, but boy, I just wish I could take out that last speech.
Yeah.
Okay. Devesh Singh writes in and says, This is very relevant. As far as I can tell, this season is the first to be on Japanese games, with DMC being a weird edge case. Do you think the country of origin changes the nature of Rottenness in terms of content and presentation? As we've talked about, Battles Without Honor and Humanity, Deadly Fight is an influence on Killer7. Is Japanese cinema a noticeable influence on this game's style in the same way Live Leak influenced Kane and Lynch 2? On a similar direction, I found it interesting how Killer7 only uses English in its voice acting, even in the Japanese version. I did not realize that. Do you think this is a choice worth digging into, or simply a consequence of the game's production?
I think the choice is based on and maybe I'm wrong, but just the game being set in America and Suda making an artistic choice there. It's kind of like how Kojima now, because he has such an American cast, usually writes his games in English first and then it's translated back to Japanese. I'm sure he writes them in Japanese, but you know what I mean. It's written for the American cast first.
Well, but I think that it is an artistic choice, and I think it's like for Kojima, he is so obsessed with American cinema and American actors and whatever that I think he is not only writing his story for those actors, but like conceptualizing his stories as English speaking movies in a lot of ways, perhaps more than he used to. And I do think, I imagine it is partially budgetary and partially, like storage on the game's disc or whatever, but like I think it is a choice to have them only speak English. But yeah, the broader part of this question on like a country's influence on what rottenness means.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, in terms of like the Japanese cinema being an influence on it, I think we talked in our bonus episode with Gareth about Deadly Fight or Hiroshima Deathmatch, whichever name you want to use for it, being just like directly relatable to the Garcian plotline. I also think like Takashi Miike's films are very huge influences on him in terms of especially stuff like I would say Ichi the Killer aesthetically and also violence-wise, but also some of the nihilism in his films like Ichi feel very present in something like Killer7. In terms of rottenness in Japanese media, one thing that I'm usually taken by is like probably not in the biggest blockbusters, but in big budget films, things that are going to get probably a full theatrical release in Japan. They are often, I find, not an expert in the field, but I watch a lot of Japanese movies, more willing to go places English American movies do not, you know what I'm saying? In terms of violence and nihilism and just general overall rottenness that I don't think is as common in American movies. And I don't know if that's because like studios have a bigger hand on American movies, if that would be more common if studios did not have as big of a creative influence, or that's a Japanese thing in general. I think like it's not uncommon to read a very popular Japanese book or manga or whatever the case might be and be like, this is fucking grisly. You know what I'm saying? Which is not to say they don't have rom-coms and normal dramas and, children's shows, etc. But I think it is more prevalent for sure. I just am not sure the hows or whys of that.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like what are our most violent mainstream movies like in the US, and it's like immediately I was like old John Wick, and John Wick is like extremely Japanese inspired. Like John Wick is essentially just like a samurai movie or whatever that being brought into modern times. And a lot of times I think we couch our violence in, because it's like America makes super violent movies, but a lot of times it is militaristic. It is like depictions of soldiers doing things, or it's kind of like horror slasher genre, which obviously Japanese has plenty of.
Sure.
But it is, it's interesting to think about. I wish we could talk about the game that we're playing for next season, but it's like how kind of America's goriest games differ from Japan's, because I also think, on kind of the other side, it's like I recently played Final Fantasy 16, which is a Japanese attempt to do a very, not American, but European story, clearly very like Game of Thrones, and they're like, oh, it's rated M, we're going to do stuff. And it's like, they don't really sell it. Like, the gore in that game doesn't really work. I don't love Game of Thrones, but you watch Game of Thrones and you're like, the gore in this is like doing things in a way that Final Fantasy 16 like does not. And so I do think that in terms of like gameness, it's hard to think of it doesn't feel like the Japanese games are quite doing the same just like level of grotesque and disgust that American and kind of in general Western games are doing right now. It's like, what are the goriest games? It's stuff like Mortal Kombat and whatever, where people are staring at corpses for weeks on end.
I think on the film side, though, you do see Japanese films often being more grim or more nasty in ways that I think are interesting. One that comes to mind, I don't know if you've seen or heard of World of Kaneko.
I have heard that name.
Okay, you might have heard AJ and me talk about it because it's a movie I fucking love. But that is a movie that like debuted at like number 4 when it came out and like made a good amount of money and stars Koji Yakusho, who like recently won Best Actor at Cannes and has won like Best Actor at the Asian Film Awards. Like, he's a huge name. When you go, he used to be one of the faces of Boss Coffee along with Tommy Lee Jones. So you just see massive billboards in like across the country with just his big ass face on it. And big ass face. World of Kaneko is like one of the grimmest films I have ever seen. And it's like, imagine Brad Pitt being in a movie full of that much violence and nihilism and just like nastiness, and it not being directed by Quentin Tarantino. Like, I think that's just more common over there. I think there is this interesting line that is like more easily crossed over there, and that audiences, at least on the film side, seem more willing to go see films and get films made with that level of content that American films don't seem to have in all cases.
Blake, I feel like it's been long enough that we've been offering Nebula exclusive stuff that we just need to run down some of the things people can get right now if they sign up and listen to this podcast on Nebula.
All right, tell me.
Okay, first off, bonus episode for every season. So that's us talking about snuff films alongside Manhunt, comic books with The Darkness, Come and See with Call of Duty. Also, those episodes have some of our best guests, like Gareth Damian Martin, the person who made Citizen Sleeper, talking about Kafka and Serial Experiments Lane, or my favorite YouTuber, Noah Caldwell-Gervais, and his thoughts on Cormac McCarthy and The Last of Us.
Okay, but also, you forgot all the other secret stuff we put up there, like 2 hours of us raving about the Resident Evil 4 remake, or you and your partner doing an extra episode on The Last of Us 2, or a new episode where we rave about the DLC for the Resident Evil remake. We're ranting and damn raving on that bonus feed.
Do you think we talk about Resident Evil 4 too much?
Hell no. We don't talk about it enough. That's why we're pivoting the show to something Resident Evil.
That's it.
That's like a dozen hours of podcasts right there that you can only hear on Nebula. And there are more every season. Sign up at nebula.tv/somethingrotten to hear them and give us money. Because if you sign up, we get money.
Which means more bonus stuff.
And I can fix my bike finally. Jacob, finally. This podcast is improving my miserable life.
Oh, you're finding value in the work? You like these games that we've been playing?
No, of course not. We play terrible games. I just actually got to try the sponsorship we've been talking about. I got a Henson razor.
Oh, yes, sir. Last razor you'll ever need.
Truly, it is amazing. I like it so much, I've just started shaving all over my body. My arms, my eyebrows, my legs, everything. I am smooth as a baby's bum, baby boy. And dear listener, you too can experience this bliss if you just go to hensonshaving.com and use the promo code ROTTEN.
You gonna use this razor to shave your head like Max Payne now?
All I'm saying is if Max Payne had a Henson razor, he would not have looked so damn patchy. That's hensonshaving.com, promo code ROTTEN.
Do you think it is also, there is a function of kind of culturally what you're used to and being shocked by something outside of that? It kind of, another way of asking that is like, if you had watched Japanese films your whole life and you came over and you're like, crash course in American movies, I'm going to start watching all the classics. Like, would there be things that you would be shocked by their inclusion, and you'd be like, oh my God, this would never be in a Japanese movie?
I have no clue. I genuinely don't know. I've never really thought about it from that perspective. I don't know. Does anything come to mind for you?
No, but I really, I'm only a very baby in watching kind of international cinema.
I mean, I think broadly speaking, I do feel like, at least in terms of, like this conversation is couched in like studio production films, right? Mm-hmm. I think American films, by and large, are more prudish than a lot of territories. Like you can think of French films, especially in terms of just like the amount of sex they are willing to put on screen.
Yeah.
And certainly in the late 90s and 2000s, the violence they put on screen. South Korean cinema is no different. Like revenge dramas are, or at least were a decade ago, huge moneymakers over there. And, I'm not trying to distill anyone's film industry down to violent or taboo films. But I think when we're talking about that type of stuff and what gets made in production pipelines or studio pipelines, America is definitely more, it's more normal for them to want to take a step back to reduce violence. I don't know if that's an audience issue, an MPAA issue. I don't really know what it is, but I think compared to other countries, like we're a bit of prudes sometimes.
I mean, it's interesting you bring that up because it's like, well, if you think about 15 years ago or whatever, like Taken was a huge movie, which is essentially a revenge drama where a guy's daughter gets kidnapped and like sex trafficked or whatever. And I think there are similar things like that, but it's like in Wanted, you don't really, it's like that movie is just kind of Liam Neeson killing people, and it's like it does not quite go to the places that even in some of the very little films that I've seen, and it doesn't go there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of me thinks it's not an audience thing. It's more of an MPAA thing at this point, because you hear so many stories about the dumb shit directors have to cut from films to not get NC-17 rating, to get it down to R.
Yeah, well, and it's like the issue of violence, I think, is specifically interesting because it's like I've always felt that, like, at least on TV, we have this ridiculous view of what is appropriate or not, because you could turn on The Walking Dead like at prime time and see people's like faces being ripped off their bodies, but like you couldn't see a boob. And I was like, that is ridiculous. Our relationship with violence is so skewed one way, and our relationship with sex is so skewed another way. But you are, what you're describing is kind of both violence and sex being more prevalent. And it's like, I've never thought of us as a country that had a problem with depicting violence before, I guess is what I'd say.
I think the level of violence is a little different in terms of how violence is depicted, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think American films, I mean, granted, Walking Dead's a special case because it's a horror film, but you think about like John Wick, they're not particularly bloody films. They don't like pause on the violence at all. The momentum is kind of the point of it. And I think you could see in other countries, the violence is certainly more reflected upon, or you spend more time with the violence and see the aftermath of violence more.
I don't know. This feels to me too generalized, because I just feel like you could find so many examples of movies not doing that.
To undercut my whole thing, what was one of the biggest movies of last year was Jackass 4, so I don't fucking know what's going on with American audiences and the way films get made, because that thing
we love to see a guy pogo sticked in the balls.
And that movie made an unbelievable amount of money, so what do I fucking know?
All right, we have a question from Lewis or Louie, asking, basically saying that they saw screenshots of Killer7 in the official Nintendo magazine and had to hide it from their parents because they were so explicit. Do you have any media that had a profound impact on you, yet you couldn't outwardly talk about it due to its content?
My mom took my copy of Cannibal Holocaust when I was a kid and didn't give it back to me until I turned 18.
Wow. So sad.
Yeah, that was...
Every child should have access to Cannibal Holocaust.
My friend Johnny Munch, shouts out to the king, go listen to Greyhaven, buy some drip from FromTheVoid.co. Bought it for me for my 15th birthday, and my mom watched it with us, and she was like, all right, you've seen the movie, and now I'm taking it, and when you turn 18, you can have it back. And when I turned 18, I got it back. I still have it.
The idea, my mom would, did she watch the whole film with you?
Yeah.
My mom would, 5 minutes in, be like, no fucking thanks. If I was 15, she would have taken it, but even now, she would let me watch it, but I would never be able to make her stay in the room.
My mom's sick as hell. Not too long ago, I was back home, and she's like, you've been watching that Resident Evil TV show? And I was like, no, Mom, life is too short. And she's like, it's pretty bad, but the gore is so sick. And I was like, cut from the same cloth, Mom. What's up? I still haven't watched the Resident Evil show. But yeah, that one, there's a couple... Jacob, do you have any? I assume not.
Not really. There are certainly just, things that I've talked about, those Hitman ads in Game Informer magazines before, where it was just a dead lady in lingerie and it was beautifully executed. I'd just be like, hope my parents don't see that page because I want them to think that this isn't a hobby for perverts.
There's a couple movies I have that when I start seeing a new person, I'll take off my shelf and then reintroduce over time back on the shelf and hope they don't ever notice. That's a true thing. I'll hide a couple movies. And one of those is Guinea Pig 2, Flower, Flesh, and Blood.
That's so funny.
Because the box art is so fucking despicable that I don't want them to see it next to be like, oh, he's got a copy of Breakfast at Tiffany's? What's Guinea Pig 2? Can't be having that. Third date. Come on now. So yes.
Okay. Benjamin Allen quickly just says, how much money do I need to shell out for a near season of this podcast? It's what the people want.
I'll do it for free. You gotta ask Jacob, though.
We just need to figure out what it looked like. Would it just be Automata? Would we be playing the first one?
I mean, our fans...
I think that's what the people want.
Yeah. I haven't played Nier. I don't know. It's supposed to be good. But I'll play Automata again for sure.
The impression I've always got of the original Nier is it is really good, but it's one of those where you really need people to tell you, hey, it's good, because when you start playing, your impression is not going to be, what a good game I'm playing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that has been made easier with the remake, right, for PS4.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We'll have to consult expert Michael Hyam, because he'll know. I'll talk to him about it. But I would do an Automata season because I think that game's rotten. And I think it's worth talking about.
All right, Blake, this seems like a question made for you. So go ahead.
Just a quickie. You guys ever encounter an album or song that jumped out as rotten? For me, recently, that's how I felt while discovering Neutral Milk Hotel's entire discography. I know I'm pretty late to the party, but especially in the Airplane Over the Sea album and Songs Against Sex, which in my opinion is also probably the best song title ever and generally a banger. Just so many fleshy, raw, lurid depictions and this endless fount of pained optimism teetering on the edge of and threatening to tip over into brutal cold nihilism, but never quite getting there. Plus, sonically, all the unhinged bass and fuzz and overdrive and pained vocals. Also, the kind of weird Anne Frank stuff. I try not to think about it, honestly. The explanations for why it's not that weird don't hold up super well. IMO. This comes from Zed. You a Neutral Milk Hotel fan?
I like that one song. The only girl I've ever loved.
Yeah.
That one?
Oh, so not the normal one.
What's the normal one?
In the Airplane Over the Sea.
Yeah, no, I like that song that I like is Holland 1945 or something, right? Yeah, in the Airplane Over the Sea itself is fine, but I like that Holland one. But I'm not an expert on Neutral Milk Hotel.
Wow, when I was a teenager, I really liked them, and I have not listened to them since. I really liked the song. What was it? Avery Island. I really liked that song. Really liked the Airplane album. But other rotten ones. I caught this in the damn Son the Rotten channel in your Discord recently. People were talking about Death Grips, rotten ass band. Oh my god. But their song, I've seen footage, is about shock sites. And I had no clue. And I went back and listened to it. And I was like, this is literally just about looking at shock sites. Other than that, I mean, you have your obvious ones, like a bunch of the Norwegian black metal shit. I mean, there's that famous story of, who is it? Mayhem, maybe, where one of their members fucking blew his brains out. So they put it on an album cover or some shit. That's fucking rotten. All of the deathcore stuff from the early 2000s that aged terribly, like Waking the Cadaver, Annotations of an Autopsy, which Annotations of an Autopsy still fucking goes. That band's fucking awesome. Probably some of the Carnifex and Whitechapel shit. Horrorcore in general, as a general concept and genre.
That like when you buy like a Halloween CD to put on, is that horrorcore?
No,
like it has like a cat like meow.
Horrorcore is like it's a rap genre that's like have you ever heard of like Tech 9?
Those little skateboards that you skate around with your fingers.
Tech decks? I have a tech deck right beside me, if you believe it. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater tech deck. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of rotten music, and a lot of stuff was not made intentionally to be rotten, and is only rotten in retrospect, as we realized a lot of like emo was horribly misogynistic. Like a lot of Taking Back Sunday shit and like Brand New, Jesus fucking Christ. All that stuff is like, as we've gotten older and looked back on it, be like, that's fucking rotten. Those are some terrible views to hold against women. And we pray at least some of those men, well, we pray all of them don't have those views anymore, but I think history showed a lot of them do. But we pray some of them found the way out. So yeah, lots of rotten music. And Jacob, I'm sure you're familiar with Waking the Cadaver, Annotations of an Autopsy.
Oh yeah,
dude,
my fave.
2007, the Sludge City EP from Annotations of an Autopsy with Gorgor Gadget. Crazy song. Still throw that on all the fucking time. The old Chelsea Grin EP, Shane Stokes and all that shit. I'll make your insides on the fucking outside. Great shit. Tons of rotten music.
Yeah, and Blake took all of mine, so I don't really have anything to add.
Not a single one. Not a single one. There's no Phoebe Bridgers rotten song. Phoebe Bridges. What the fuck? Which one is the singer?
Well, they're all the singer. Phoebe Bridgers.
Phoebe Waller.
Sam Porter Bridgers.
Phoebe Waller Bridges.
Phoebe Waller. Bridge is Fleabag.
Oh.
The actor.
Okay. And Phoebe.
Sam Porter Bridgers. Crosses the country.
And Phoebe Bridgers is Kyoto Boy Genius.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Who could get them mixed up?
Okay, Brendan, quick fires some questions. Here's the one that I think we should wrap up the show with. What's the least rotten game you've ever played?
I'm playing Skater VR right now. Skateboarding game in VR. Nothing rotten to it.
You think that's not rotten?
No,
you
dude.
fall and break your leg?
No, you fall and you immediately warp back to the skateboard. Jacob, it's a fucking good game. It's really fun. I'm going to play it as soon as we get off this podcast.
How do you do, like, tricks?
Okay, so...
Is it just controller?
So you have the two... I'm playing it on PSVR 2, so you have the two VR controllers, and those mimic foot movements, right? So when you ollie up and you want to do a kickflip, you have to flick your arm up and out off the left side of the board, and then catch it with, like, the X button. And then if you want to do, like, a pop shove it, you'll take your right hand and you'll flip it behind you and the board will shove it. It's fucking cool. It has a lot in common with like Skate and how those are played.
Well, I was thinking of, because I remember when Skate came out, kind of the advertising behind it was like, this is not like Tony Hawk where you press a button and do a trick. Like you have to learn the movements on the stick itself. And this seems like an evolution of that.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. But last night I was doing a kickflip over a gap, grabbing the tail to catch, and then landing like 9 feet below, and it just like feels like you're fucking doing it in real life. It's really cool. Made by a one-person team, no less.
Is it nauseating?
No, not really at all. I've had no nausea problems in PSVR 2 at all. Like even playing Res Area X, where you're like 360ing and flying around all the time, like literally no problems.
I think honestly Res surprises me less than, because that one it's like zero, you're just kind of like it's nothing, it's like zero gravity. Something like Skate, because the problem is always just when you feel like your feet should be moving and they're not moving. Like that's when I get kind of like but my guess is also that the PSVR has kind of tighter quality controls on it than like the random shit that I will download on PC sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. I'll say this is also a one-person team, so I expected less from it. But like it's really, really impressive. So that's probably the least rotten game I've ever played.
I think Res is a pretty good answer.
But Res is about climate change at the end of the world.
Yeah, but like positive. So is like Flower. It's not saying that world is going to end.
I don't know. I think it is. In Res, you play like a malicious computer virus.
Yeah, but the end is like good, right? Don't you like free the virus?
There's a boss that runs away from you in fear.
Oh, that's right. Okay, well, it's not Res. I was actually my first thought was the game Everything.
Oh, cool.
David O'Reilly's Everything, which I think is a really good game in general, but is also a game about just like everything being connected and everything being part of one kind of ecosystem, and for one thing to exist means that everything exists and all that, and it is just like a very it is the opposite of nihilism. It is just like everything has meaning because it exists.
Can we answer the other question too? I think it's cool.
Which one?
Are there any game series you have avoided playing because you think they may come up on the pod?
Well, I feel like this is a peek behind the curtain.
But I have some.
Okay.
Fucking the Silver Case and 25th Ward. I want to play them so fucking bad, but I'm like, are we going to do those for the goddamn
Just play them.
If I do, I can't do them for the pod. I don't like replaying games.
I have been holding off on playing Amnesia the Bunker because I think an Amnesia series would be interesting, and that game seems interesting. That's about it.
Yeah.
I love replaying games.
I've been waiting to play Postal 3.
Yeah, you can't wait.
Return.
Every day you ask me. Well, look, that's it for this finale of the Suda season. We hope you enjoyed hearing us answer questions. Check out that bonus episode on Nebula. It's already out, and it will give you a little sneak peek of what our next season is going to be.
I gotta play a lot of that tonight. Long-ass game. God damn.
It's a long-ass game, but Blake, you're excited about it, right?
Absolutely. I'm excited to play it tonight.
I'm excited about it.
I'm skipping a wedding rehearsal dinner because I gotta play it, so I don't lose track. That's not the reason I'm skipping it. I just can't afford a wedding rehearsal dinner tonight.
Well, until then, my name is Jacob Geller. I have been joined by Blake Hester, and let's find that exit they call paradise.
I'm glad you didn't say the other thing you've been saying this season.